Hello and welcome to the Fintech Finance Virtual Arena. Today we are going to be discussing small to medium enterprises, Soldo, and of course the impact that the pandemic has had on the industry. So joining me today, I actually have Darren Upson over from Soldo themselves. So Darren, thank you for joining me on the Virtual Arena today. I don't suppose, could you give me a bit of background to your role at Soldo and really what Soldo do in that space?
Sure. So my role is VP Small Business Europe, which basically means I'm responsible for everything to do with the small business customer acquisition and lifecycle management. We look after customers that range from a couple of employees up to thousands of employees and everything in between. But what we solve for an organization is we solve for the actual spending in an organization. So what we do is we provide prepaid cards to organizations. They can set those up, set rules in terms of how money can be spent, issue those cards to employees, and then every time any money is spent, the user is prompted to take a photograph of the receipt, categorize that expense. It all feeds straight through into the accounting platform too. So what we're doing is automating expense management, but also spending all the way from payment through to reconciliation as well, integrating with the likes of Xero, QuickBooks Online, and also some of the other accounting platforms out there as well. Okay,
brilliant. So you're pretty well placed to kind of give me an overview of, this is quite a big question. Take as much time as you need. But pre-pandemic, what were some of the key issues you thought that small to medium enterprises or SMEs were really facing when it came to their finances?
I mean, it's something that's affected organisations ever since the get-go. I mean, cash is the silent killer in an organisation, or the lack of. So cash flow management's always been incredibly important, and that's one of the key areas which we try to help organisations with, because the situation is, if an organisation is spending more than's coming in through the door, then there's a fundamental challenge in terms of the sustainability of that organisation. And with the kind of the status quo in a lot of organisations where they're using credit cards, reimbursable expenses and everything else, effectively a lot of the spending can kind of get slightly out of control. And again, the integrations back to the accounting software just mean that from a finance perspective, organizations that are using Soldo, but cash flow management solutions like Fluidly, Float, Futurely, things like that as well, in addition to an accounting platform like Xero, like QuickBooks, means that what they've got is complete insight in terms of their finances, so they can see the money coming in, the money going out, and they can plan their businesses in a much more structured fashion. The challenge, for organizations has always been cash flow runway. So, if it's a lot of companies lead a pretty much hand-to-mouth existence. So, my prior role to Soldo was at Xero, where I led marketing of a small business team there. And in that situation, we did some analysis looking at cash flow runway. So, if an organization didn't receive any more money in through the door, how long could that company keep going for before they ran out of cash? And the situation there for the majority of smaller businesses was, you're looking at around 60 or so days in terms of cash flow runway. So it's not a lot of time, but the average kind of, day sales outstanding, or, so time to be paid on average was between 40 and 50 days. So if you think about that, the gap there, the tolerances are really quite slim, which provides some real challenges when the going is good. When the going gets a little bit tougher, it places even more pressure on those businesses from a cash flow perspective.
I mean, that's absolutely incredible to think that there's just that almost 20 days where it can go from being absolutely class, everything's going brilliantly, to suddenly you actually might have to forfeit your business. And it must be incredibly frustrating, going back to that cash flow instance, and the fact that the money is coming. It's just, It hasn't come through. Now, with that in mind, with technology and payment technology especially, really changing over the last couple of years, have you seen regulation kind of catch up with that? Has the regulation have compliance issues to pay on time? Have they caught up with the fact that now businesses can send money instantly?
I'm not sure about from a regulatory perspective, if I'm being honest. I think that technology solutions have come along, If you look at things like, market finance and solutions like that, where you've got invoice finance capability, all of a sudden what you've got is solutions where actually if there is a situation where there's a delay between the invoice being issued and actually receiving payment, there are alternative mechanisms to actually get that money through the door faster. So I think that there are solutions out there that have come through, and I think the technology that's kind of been, it's not really, it's creating an easier way for businesses to access those types of services. But what's super interesting is the fact that, up until now it's been quite niche in terms of those providers have offered the services to a relatively small number of organisations. What you're now seeing is you're seeing the high street banks with their business banking propositions actually coming out with similar types of solutions. So actually, understanding the core challenges facing businesses and trying to provide services that actually, add significant value to those organizations as well. And I think that's a really interesting thing that we're starting to see. I think from a compliance and regulatory perspective, there's not really the rules and regulations in place to solve for some of these challenges. However, what you've got is situations where all of the companies that we're talking about, they are compliant. They're regulated. They are authorized by the FCA or whoever it might be. So they are, there is a very structure in place. But I think the issue is a lot of organizations out there sadly they're not aware of some of these alternative ways to actually get money in through the door. So it's an interesting option for organisations to start looking at some of these more kind of, I think, disruptive solutions to solve the problem around payments and receiving payments.
Interesting. Now we've kind of discussed what the environment was like before COVID-19, but now obviously we've had a massive change to retail,
Sure.
especially, and obviously small medium enterprises have really suffered as a result. I mean, what have been some of the key issues SMEs have faced as a result of the pandemic?
I mean, when you've got a recession, you can see the fact that there are some trends where the market is declining. With the pandemic and the lockdown, what we saw is that business stopped overnight for a lot of organisations. So, we've never seen anything as stark as that, where effectively one day it's business as usual, the next day actually, everything just goes pear-shaped. And I think that, that's been the biggest challenge for a lot of smaller companies because, certainly ones in hospitality have really suffered as a result of this, hospitality and travel, because, overnight their businesses become incredibly unpredictable. They don't know when they're going to come back online. Some of the companies have managed to pivot, which is awesome. But the problem is we're still not in a situation where the market has returned or business has returned to normal. Add on top of that, you've got situations like, employees still need to be paid. So what do you do with those employees? You've still got money going out the door in rent and everything else as well. But, so business has to continue, but actually you've got no more money coming in through the door. So how do you continue to operate? I think some of the stuff around CBILS has really helped, and also the furlough scheme as well. But, any money that has been lent, because it is lending ultimately, needs to be repaid at some stage. So, one of the things that's really important is the fact that, even now that we're starting to see some green shoots in the economy, I think what business owners and finance teams and organizations need to be aware that money needs to be repaid. So, it's all good. It's all well and good receiving money, but you see some horror stories on the TV and everything else where companies, they're accepting the money, but actually they know that it's going to be very, very difficult to repay that money when the money is due to be repaid.
Wow.
So it's pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there needs to be an element of education behind CBILS? Do you think there are even some businesses that just think it's a government bailout and it's just almost free?
No, I don't think so. I think most company owners are all fully aware of the situation. I think from our perspective, we work very closely with accountants and bookkeepers, so that's one of our core channels to market. And actually, it's interesting when we talk to our accounting partners. And actually, the majority of the time over since COVID struck, they've actually been trying to help their clients actually understand what the different options are that are available to them, whether it's traditional loans, whether it's CBILS, how to leverage the furlough scheme in the most effective way as well. But what they're doing is they're trying to educate their clients to make sure that they're aware of what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, restructuring their organization if possible as well, but also trying to provide some advice in terms of how to pivot. I mean, we talk about the hospitality sector, restaurants and so on and so forth. There's some really interesting stories out there of companies that, they're a bricks and mortar business, but actually overnight with, a solution like Square or whatever it might be, they've suddenly become, an online business. They've become a takeaway. And actually it's an amazing, it's amazing how resilient some of these businesses actually have been in terms of being able to actually pivot their business pretty much overnight to actually change the way in which they operate. Suddenly you've got restaurants becoming butchers or whatever it might be, and providing all of this stock that they've got to be able to sell to end customers. But yeah, it's been a challenging period for small business owners. I mean, there's no
just
doubt.
Even anecdotally, back in my parents' town where they live, in my hometown, whenever I was visiting, I would always, in such a millennial way, I'd almost be upset because there was no Deliveroo options or anything like that.
Yeah.
It felt like going back to the Stone Age. But because of the pandemic, now every restaurant on that high street is offering it, is on Deliveroo, on Uber Eats, and it's completely digitized. What was probably going to take at least another 5 years to happen in just a small matter of weeks.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we've now covered on what happened to small, medium enterprises before COVID and as a result of COVID. But if we look more towards the kind of finance and banking side of things, what were the defining characteristics of business banking offerings pre-COVID? We talked about cash flow being an issue. Why was this such an issue? And why weren't the banks offering financial service products to enable banks to do this enable businesses to act better?
I mean, the banking sector as a whole is pretty conservative and it's quite slow to move. The reality of life is the fact that the banks will offer the services that their customers need, and the vast majority, sadly, the vast majority of businesses out there just they're not aware of the requirements. So there's almost the status quo is acceptable. And I think that's one of the interesting things. We look at things like the adoption curve, and certainly companies that use services like Soldo, that use services like Market Finance, that use iWalker, those types of services, they're typically at the bleeding edge. They are the innovators, the early adopters out there that are using services like those before it becomes a mass solution. And because banks are relatively slow to actually move, to actually introduce services like this, typically what will happen is it's the disruption of an industry through the fintech solutions that are out there, like ourselves, that actually help to drive, it helps to drive change in the banks in terms of their propositions, in terms of what they provide. It still makes me laugh today, the fact that Barclays run a campaign focused around you can freeze your card. Amazing. We've had that for since 2015 when the business was founded. So it's little things like that, but it's starting to actually understand what is it that the actual customers need, and providing those services rather than just having a pretty beige service offering which is offered by every single high street bank. I also think that the existence of Starling, the existence of Monzo as well, both from a consumer and also from a business perspective, are changing people's expectations, because all of a sudden what you've got is, in your personal life, if you're able to, manage your money better, if you're also able to have instant visibility of transactions, and if you can, analyze what you're spending and how you're spending it, then you're going to expect that in your business life as well. And that's what some of the stuff that we're starting to see as well. The service that we're providing actually resonates with the businesses or business owners that are actually using these neobank solutions, and it's raising expectations across the board. Raising expectations in such a way that actually many of the high street banks are really going to struggle to actually have parity with those neobank solutions, because they're so great in relation to, I've got a Barclays card, and I've got a Monzo, and I've got Starling, and I've got all these other solutions. I see the transactions on Monzo and Starling instantly. It's just like I do with Soldo from a business perspective. But with my Barclays card, it's like, a couple of days later, I might see the transaction come through. It's not even in the same realm.
Yeah. I mean, with that in mind, I mean, now that obviously we do have the companies like Xero, Soldo, and the Monzos and Starlings, do you think that soon the large traditional banks are going to bring their weight to bear when it comes to offering these kind of more specialized products for small, medium enterprises?
Absolutely, I think that we're already starting to see it. We're already seeing it with some of the services, but we're already seeing it with some of the partnerships that are being established as well. So if we look at it from the perspective of someone like Barclays, they recently invested in market finance, and there's a joint go-to-market motion they've got with market finance. If we look at the likes of what they're doing with, say, Flux, from a digital receipt perspective, again, they're investing money. They're working very closely with some of these disruptive players. I think over the next few years, there's going to be an awful lot of consolidation in the space, where actually a lot of these traditional banks, rather than building, they're actually going to end up buying a lot of the fintech players. So there will be consolidation in the market as well, and that's already become clear from some of the statements made over a year ago, actually, by the COO at HSBC, where actually it's very much a case of we're looking to consolidate, and we're looking to buy rather than build ourselves, because we know if we were to build something, it would take us 5 years, whereas actually it's something that already exists with some of the attractive fintechs that are out there. So I think what we'll see is a lot of consolidation in the market over the next few years, with some of these amazing fintechs that operate in London, around the UK, actually helping to drive change in a positive way for customers within business banking.
Yeah, I've got to ask just the question that is it quite frustrating having these services that for instance Soldo provide, or the neobanks provide, and then, as you said, 5 years later, Barclaycard finally come up and say, oh, we can actually freeze your card. Look at us, how amazing! When obviously you've been doing it for 5 years.
I wouldn't say frustrating. I think it's almost affirmation about the fact that actually, these companies are starting to catch up. But I mean, this is typical with any large business. They move like an oil tanker. So what you've got is a situation where we can be like a speedboat. We can introduce new features as and when required. We can be really agile. Some of these other organizations, they just can't. So what it does, it provides a huge opportunity for an organization like ourselves to actually, gain significant market penetration. And what we're doing is we're providing a complementary service that sits alongside traditional business banking, which is what an awful lot of fintech providers out there are doing. I mean, we have an e-money license as an organization, so we could actually provide a full business banking solution if we wanted to, but that's not the route we want to go down as an organization. What we actually want to do is provide we want to deal with all types of spend in an organization. So if you think about it, the way that we position Soldo is an on-top account. It's not replacing your business banking account, but it's your spend money account. So what you can then do is, if you want to, control that money that's being spent, you can use Soldo. If you want to make sure that, you can ring fence those funds, you use Soldo, rather than giving effectively like a loaded gun, which like a credit card or whatever it might be, to members of staff so they can go and spend money in a particular way. So we're actually more focused on additional ways that we can provide value to our customers to manage the spending process, regardless of what type of spending that might be. Yeah,
and you brought up earlier, kind of not, the early adopters have that demand of what they want and what they will want.
Yeah.
But generally, how do you, when it comes to offering up these new services, come up with these innovative ideas? Is it led by customers, or do you actually realize that you break down from the beginning that this innovative journey, that you've got this technology, why don't you incorporate it? Or does Soldo look at solving issues that customers have brought up?
It's a combination of everything that you just mentioned. I mean, ultimately, we wouldn't develop something if there was no customer need. So first of all, we try to identify what the customer issues are, what the challenges are that they face on a day-to-day basis. We then look at how technology potentially can help support that process. And what we'll then do is we will then try to understand how we can tackle that problem and provide a solution to that. That means that actually it makes the life of the customer that we've got easier. They can do their job better. It frees up the friction, and we automate as much as possible in terms of the administration associated with running a finance function, or indeed just spending money.
And to kind of wrap up, I'm going to give you two kind of crystal ball type questions. So, I mean, what technologies do you think are going to play an ever increasing role when it comes to B2B, fintechs going forward?
Well, I think the one which has been talked about for a long time now is open banking. Up until now, open banking has not really delivered that much in terms of huge benefits. A lot of people are talking about it, but actually there's not a huge amount of meat.
There's no action.
No, very little action. But I mean, from our perspective, we're looking at open banking in terms of how we can consolidate that as part of our core offering. Payment initiation, dealing with, so within Soldo, I'll give you an example. Within Soldo, what we have is the ability where we have auto top-ups from within the company wallet to individual user wallets, which means that, say for example, I always have £500 on my card as a minimum balance. If I drop below that, it automatically tops up. Very simplistic, but it manages the money that's on my wallet and allocates accordingly. If we could do the same thing, whereby actually you could automatically top up from the business bank account into Soldo through faster payments using open banking to initiate that payment transaction, then all of a sudden what we're doing is we're automating a process that would otherwise require manual intervention or manual administration. So we're looking at it from that perspective in terms of how can we free up, reduce the friction points, leveraging open banking to help actually improve the user experience and mean that our customers don't have to actually, go in and administer, go into the business bank account, transfer the money out, get it onto Soldo. So it's thinking about it from that perspective. So at the moment, what we're trying to do is reduce the drag associated with managing money in a business. And open banking is certainly part of that. It's going to be really interesting, I think, over the next couple of years, because it's been, this big splurge around open banking, and then all of a sudden, actually, nothing's really happened. I think actually moving forwards over the next 24 months, we're going to see some really interesting things happening. And it's not just going to be about money management. It's going to be about how does open banking operate to actually centrally enable businesses to manage spend in one place, which I think is really, really interesting.
Definitely. And, topically, I think HMRC just recently, they've started a new open banking functionality to pay through the bank account rather than a card, because that's where they've seen most customer failure when it comes to a payment. So I always find it interesting that when a government's finally doing it, it shows that the wheels have started turning. But previously, maybe it'd been slow uptake. Now, I mean, you've kind of brought in technologically what you're going to be doing at Soldo, but going forward, where do you see Soldo going in the future? You said you weren't going to become a bank. You sit on top of an account. What really is the next play for Soldo?
As I say, I mean, for us, it's more about handling a broader array of spend within a business, but also expansion into new markets as well. So back in March, when COVID was probably at its worst, actually, in terms of lockdown, March, April, we launched into 4 new markets. So we actually, for us, with Brexit and everything else as well, we're now licensed and authorized to operate across all the different markets. We created a parallel organization. So whilst originally we were operating under our license with the FCA across all of Europe, with Brexit on the horizon for the last 3 years, we've been working to actually establish a license out of Ireland as well, for the Central Bank of Ireland. So what we now have is we have a dual license, which means that we can continue to operate out of Europe as well as the UK, but also it means that there's an opportunity for us to actually look at how we can expand our operations outside of our 2 core markets, which at the moment are the UK and also Italy as well. So expansion into new markets is kind of critical for us as well moving forwards. We're growing like a juggernaut. So it's a case of how do we make sure that we continue to grow in the right way, and we're trying to build best practice in terms of the markets that we're currently in and then deploy into new markets accordingly. So yeah, it's really exciting times actually.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Darren. I hope it's been all right for you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And to all our viewers, thank you very much for watching. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at www.fintechf.com and of course YouTube and LinkedIn. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.